Hi everyone, welcome to Module 8 of the MasterPal series. We will be discussing appropriate prompting and how to let the child lead and the benefits of both today, and we're so excited. This MasterPal series was created by the wonderful Tabitha Jones-Wohleber, and we have modified it a little bit with how we are presenting it with our slides. If you go to PrAACtical AAC, as we've said before, and you want to find the original modules and all of the handouts and supports that Tabitha provides, you'll be looking for modules 10 and 11. All right, I am Jeanna Antrim. Hello, I'm a Basque AAC facilitator and I am also an SLP.
And hi, Maggie Judson, an SLP and AAC facilitator with Basque as well.
And we love this MasterPal series because it's
Yes,
all
we do.
about growing our skills so that we can
Mhm.
become supporting exemplar AAC communication partners to our AAC users.
Yes, we are getting close to the end now, but we are loving every single module. So again, we'll say today, like, oh, wow, we love these modules because every month they're fabulous. So as we're going through today and out the whole series, we're going to be talking a lot about AAC because we're talking about how to become good communication partners to support our AAC learners and our AAC users. But these are communication partner skills and strategies that we are talking about and we are learning about and we are practicing to apply to our day-to-day interactions. And they can apply to any student that you work with. So we're super glad you're here.
Yes. All right, here's the whole MasterPal breakdown of the topics that we have reviewed. After today, we've reviewed all of them except for engaging naturally, which will be our last one next month.
All right, so Master Pal, let's break that down. So master is the first part of that. And a master is when you're becoming a skilled practitioner in a certain activity. So this is why we are going into lots of depth. We are meeting every month and we are going into all of these different areas with lots of examples and talking it over so that we are becoming really knowledgeable in all of these different communication partner skills. We want to become that expert, right? Where we are learning and we are applying that learning to our practice because we want to become proficient and we want to know it inside out. We are becoming skilled. We are becoming a master in communication partner skills throughout this module and throughout this training.
And as we continue to develop our skills, we have to remember, though, that that
Mhm.
pal piece is super important as well. We need to be a friend, a buddy, comrade, companion to our AC users as well. Because think about it, if I'm not interested in you and having fun with you, consider you to be a buddy, I'm not going to be as motivated to really communicate with you or to communicate a lot and use a lot of different functions and for a variety of purposes. So we need to have that buddy companion piece there so that our students and our users are motivated and want to communicate to us as well.
All right, so this is shared every module, the Communication Bill of Rights. Go print it out, go download it, put it up in all your classrooms and your therapy rooms, use it when you meet with your teams. It's just a really great reminder of all of the things that we as a communication partner need to make sure that we are doing to support our students, anybody that we're working with, any of our AAC users. So definitely go print this out.
Mhm. All right, and then so AC is that umbrella term. We always like to review this because it really is an umbrella term that encompasses a lot. It encompasses the communication, the methods, and the tools that are used to supplement and or replace speech or writing for those with impairments in the production or their comprehension of spoken and written language. So it is a huge umbrella that has a lot underneath it. We may use it for certain parts and then not others. So you just have to be aware that AAC can mean a lot for a lot of different types of students.
And one more thing to keep in mind, maybe you have been participating, maybe you're watching this today and you're thinking to yourself, I have some students, but I don't know if they would benefit from those AAC tools and strategies. So one thing we like to do is think through, is their current communication system meeting their needs? Are they able to like communicate for any reason they would want to? And if the answer is no, or I'm not sure, then yes, they would benefit from that umbrella term of AAC. And that's why it's great that you are learning about all the different ways to become a good communication partner so that you can support those students.
Mhm. All right, so now we're going to delve into our first module that we're going to be reviewing, module number 10. It's going to be appropriate prompting, and this is how we're scaffolding success.
All right, so appropriate prompting. This is something that we talk about probably every time we go into a team training. It's always something that's getting brought up or that we're addressing or that we're analyzing in ourselves when we're working with students. So, key concepts here, the definition of prompting. It's a supportive level of cueing or a supportive level of assistance that is we're using to try to move our students from like their current level with a skill and get them to be more independent, right? It has a function, and it's the function is that we're giving that support in a very structured way so that our students can progress in their skill. The goal is the ultimate goal when we are doing prompting and providing appropriate prompting is to foster student autonomy so that ownership with their skills. Specifically, we're talking today about communication skills and tools. So our ultimate goal when we decide, you know what, this student needs a certain level of prompting, the goal is to foster their ownership and their independence with their communication skills. And that autonomy, we brought this up before, it's that ability to make choices according to our own free will. So it's not that compliance tool. It is not doing something because somebody wants us to do it. It's us making choices and doing the things that we want to do because that's what we want to do. And that's what prompting is in place for. We use prompting to work on independence and to work on that ownership of our own skills. And when we're thinking about AAC and communication specifically, appropriate prompting again is leading to that independence. But for a child to become independent, that student has to understand that their unique voice is being heard. So we talk about that a lot about what we're working on is communication, not compliance. And appropriate prompting, when you are really analyzing it and learning about it and doing it correctly for your student is going to help lead to that, to them realizing that this is their unique voice. It is their way to communicate what's on their minds.
Exactly. And this is the prompting hierarchy that Maggie and I use. We absolutely love it. It is definitely supported by research that is out there for communication. It was developed by Kate Ahern and Sheilane Nielsen. If you Google it, you'll find it. If you go to PrAACtical AAC, you can find it. If you download this module and then you just click on this picture, you can, it'll take you straight to the document. I print these out now and hand them out like core boards.
Yeah.
So I have them ready because I absolutely love this prompting hierarchy. And one of the reasons is because at the top, that umbrella term, just like we say AAC's, that umbrella term that encompasses a lot. And the first thing you have to think of, aided language input is at the top of this umbrella. Before you even think about providing a prompt, you need to consider how much aided language input you are providing for that student, because I guarantee it's probably that you need to up a little bit of your aided language input. This should be provided all day for different words across environments for different functions of communication. I mean, that's the first area that you need to stop and think and make sure that you're providing adequate aided language input before you, like I said, start to go down the line of what prompt do I need to do. And then her next one is one of the modules that we've done, creating motivation. You need to consider, am I motivating the student? Is this activity motivating them enough? Because if that motivation isn't there, it's probably then that they just don't want to communicate. It's not that they need a prompt, it's that they're not wanting to communicate with us right now. And we don't want to get into that whole compliance area like Maggie said, and we've talked about in previous modules. So those are like my top two. I love these top two. And then as you go down, it's great. And at the bottom, if none of those prompts worked, she says, consider your motivation again and the vocabulary and, re-expose which you would be doing that through that aided language input. So you go back to the top, and those first two are so crucial. So this prompting hierarchy, like I said, it's supported by the research that's out there for us in communication and for using and how to support our AAC users. We absolutely love this. So please download it and print off lots of
Yeah.
copies. And we even say Mod Podge. I think we have an Instagram post, don't we, Maggie,
Yeah.
on Mod Podging it to the back of a clipboard.
Yep.
So that way too, you're like advertising it. You always have it on hand because we need it too to support ourselves. Like, especially once I get into like that yellow and orange area, I'm like, I don't know which one I'm doing next. I'm definitely not perfected that because I spend so much time probably at the top, 2 and 3. But prompting is something that we can consider. It is necessary
Mhm.
for some of our students in order for them to become successful. It's a support that we need to provide. It's just you need to be very cognizant of when you're providing those prompts. Like I said, make sure that those top 3 you're putting into play with the whole aided language input, the motivation, and those expectant pause, that you're putting those 3 into play before you start to consider going into another prompt. You only use it for as long as necessary. And each time that you start, you don't start at the level of prompting that you left off at. You start at the top again and you work your way down. You don't immediately jump into a prompt again, because when we do that, our students then can fall into a learned helplessness and they become prompt dependent. And we don't want that, because then we're not going to get any of that snug communication from them at all. And they're just going to continue to wait for us before they initiate. And we don't want that. We want them to initiate on their own. We want them to give us snug communication. And so that involves us starting at the top of this prompt hierarchy every time, focusing on those top 3 before you actually try to provide a support to them. So just being very cognizant of that and making sure that you're pulling back as soon as you can on the level of prompts for them, so that they don't become prompt dependent.
And I like there how it says you have a plan in place. So this is like
Yeah.
something that would be great to bring up at team meetings and talk about, because you really can kind of fall in that trap of keeping your prompting at too high of a level if you're not really analyzing yourself or talking as a group, to have that plan in place to reduce those prompts. So yeah, we love that prompt hierarchy. All right, so from that you saw there are different types of prompting, right? So that umbrella term, aided language input, that has to be happening first before, like Jeanna said, before you even consider doing anything else, aided language input. So it might be like that's where your focus is for the next month in your classroom. We are just going to make sure we are really hitting that aided language input. Okay, so then though, at the same time, you'll probably want to consider that motivation piece. That was at the top. Motivation, ensure that there's value in that interaction for your student. And like we said before, it can come down to a motivating activity. It comes down to the relationship that you've built with your student. It's come down to how comfortable they are in your classroom or therapy room with your schedule and the structure. And those things can take some time, but you really need to focus and make sure that there's that motivation piece happening. Because like Jeanna said, they may not be participating or responding or communicating in this moment because they don't want to. So then if we over prompt because we haven't taken care of that motivation piece, that is just an over prompt then, and that's a compliance task. It's no longer about communication. So you really want to focus in there. Then that next prompt right under it was that pause and that expectant look to give an opening. And actually, Jeanna and I, we meet before we record these to practice and make sure, we got it going on for what we're going to say. And so we talked about this last week a lot. And then earlier in the week, I was working with a student. And this is why it's so important to print these out and put them everywhere and check yourself, because if we wouldn't have talked about that, I would have overprompted my student. So I did the, aided language input. It was a motivating activity, but I immediately asked a question and I was not going to pause and wait. Like, you get going, and I was going to immediately jump into a direct verbal or direct visual prompt. That was going to be my next thing. When you look at that hierarchy, I had skipped a few steps and it like dinged in my mind, and I stopped myself and I closed my mouth and I waited. And after, the student needed about 15 seconds, okay, but you could see they did it all on their own. And if I would have jumped in, there I'm remember that clock. We always talk about that video of that clock that you show where this it's closing for that student. I would have interrupted that process and I would have stolen that opportunity for the student to make that connection on their own and then to say something that they wanted to say. So it's just such a reminder. And like, we talk about this all the time, but you really have to check yourself. And that's why this is an important thing to bring up. So then after your expectant look, you're pausing, then you go into those visual prompts. So first you do an indirect and then you do a direct, right? Then we go into a verbal prompt and you'll do an indirect and then a verbal, or an indirect and then a direct verbal. And that's spoken by the communication partner or by the student's AAC system. It could be cued by sound from the communication partner. There's lots of different ways to do that. But again, you want to make sure you're going down the line. And then with that visual, like I said before, that would be a point or a gesture. Sometimes that's like moving the AAC system closer to the student, or like just kind of gesturing at the device, just to draw attention to that. And when you looked at that prompt hierarchy, down there is where it stopped. You will see other prompt hierarchies that include a physical prompt. There is a place for that in other systems and other tools, or that's not the word, other times. But when we're talking about communication and when we're working on language and communication and AAC systems, we like that prompt hierarchy that stops after a non-directive model and then circles back up to the top. Physical prompting can be a light touch, a partial physical, or a full physical, but the research out there for communication and developing snug wouldn't support it. So this is something though that if you feel there might be a need, this is definitely a time to call in your AAC therapist, chat with them and ask them like, hey, I really think that there might be a place for this. Maybe your student has some sensory issues or they have physical difficulties that are making it hard for them to access the device. But before you go to physical all on your own, make sure you're doing this as a team discussion. Have somebody come in who has experience. Have your AAC facilitator come in so you can talk about this. And then have a plan in place for you to move away from that extremely quickly. So while all of those, that prompt hierarchy from K to Hearn, that's all good. Do that on your own. But if you feel like there's a need for physical, definitely have a talk with somebody who has a lot of experience working with a variety of students who use AAC to communicate. Because again, the whole idea of prompting is that we want to quickly move up so that we're providing less and less, and that we are working on communication, not compliance. Mm-hmm. So again, it's just something to think about. Make sure you are really analyzing yourself and you have a plan in place for it.
Exactly. All right, so we want you to take some time now and think of a student or students that you have who are using some form of an AAC system in your classroom or in your therapy room. And what level does that student require for each of these different activities and communication functions? So if they're wanting to request, a favorite food at snack time, a toy, so a desired activity or desired object, for them to request that, what kind of prompting do they need? Most likely it's not going to be that much prompting because they're highly motivated for that. The motivation is there. They know exactly what they want. They probably have had a lot of experience requesting it because if it's desired, it's something that is a favorite for them. And so the frequency of requesting it is probably pretty high. So they probably don't need any prompting, I would assume, just that expectant pause and that wait time for them, and the opportunity to be able to request it. Now think about for them to participate in a familiar routine, so something that happens daily. So like coming into the classroom and doing a greeting, that circle time activity is something that you do every day. And that is very routine and familiar to them. What level of prompting do they need to participate? Probably not that much. And the reason why is because it's something that's done consistently for them. And we've talked about before that with that repetition, with that routine, that they have and with an activity that's done daily, that confidence builds. They know what to expect. So you're not having any kind of anxiety. They're maybe motivated to participate as well. Especially some of those circle time activities can get really fun.
Mhm.
So you probably don't need that much prompting, just a little bit of support here and there, but you don't have to go too far down on that prompting hierarchy. Now think about for them to request to participate in an activity. So to request to participate in an activity that maybe doesn't happen every day, maybe once a week, maybe once a month or something. So something that's a little bit less familiar, a craft, coloring activity, cooking activity, science experiment. What level of prompting then? It might be a little bit more because if it's not a familiar activity that they know a lot, if it's, and it would depend on motivation. Some of this, like a science experiment's probably maybe a little bit more motivating for a student than maybe a craft is. So depending on their motivation level and their familiarity with it, that's going to dictate what level of prompting that they may need. So again, with all of these though, get that prompting hierarchy out and start at the top and work your way down. Just like Maggie and I said, we're still using it to help
Mhm.
ourselves and keep ourselves in check for sure. Okay, and then our last scenario here is what level of prompting would your student or students need um, to respond to questions about a lesson? And this is going to depend again on that motivation with their familiarity with that activity. So when we reviewed the statements more than questions module that we did, you know, if this is the first time that you're doing the lesson and you ask the question, they're probably going to need quite a bit of support because they're not familiar. They haven't had that repetition with variety with the content yet and everything. So they're probably going to need a little bit more support versus if you're further on than the lesson. So there's a lot of things that play into it. And I think just remembering that, being cognizant of it, and remembering that top of the hierarchy, which is key. Like Maggie said, you know, we have to consider our aided language input. We have to consider the motivation of the student for that activity. And we have to make sure that we're providing that wait time and that processing and learning time for them before we get down further into what kind of prompt we're going to provide and automatically going into a verbal or anything.
Yeah. I also like those thinking prompts because it's like you can just see how the same student is going to need
Mhm.
differing levels of support throughout their day and how that's expected because that's how our day looks. So
Yeah.
it's just nice to know, like, hey, during an activity that's routine, I'm going to back off and I'm going to really stay at the top of that prompt hierarchy to see maybe I've been way down here and they don't need that support anymore because it is embedded and I can come up here. But that doesn't mean that in other times I might have to, you know, give more support. It's just, again, I love talking about this because it
Yeah.
really just, it has
Well,
an
and it
immediate
just goes, like you
impact.
said, important for why you start at the top every time. You don't just automatically assume that because of this, like we said, that you're going to start at that level again. No, you're going to start at the top every time
Mhm.
um, so that we're providing the least amount possible for them so that we're not developing that prompt dependency.
Exactly. I love it. All right. So when we're using a prompt hierarchy, um, we you can think through like a most to least and a least to most. So sometimes there might be a place in your day that you would do a most to least, where you would kind of start at a higher level of support right out of the gate. That can be for a new skill that you're introducing for the first time. So the first time you introduce that skill, you might go, you know, a little bit higher on that prompt hierarchy because it can help teach that activity, can help teach that skill. It can provide a positive practice opportunity right away. But again, that's not where you're going to stay. That's going to be like a quick support and then flip to that least to most. Okay. So this is when you're working with an AAC system. This is when you're working on teaching vocabulary. This is when you're working on teaching communication and content and context. So least to most is like we keep saying, go to the top, right? So you go to that umbrella. First, you check yourself. Am I providing native language input? Okay, great. Motivation. Yeah, you know, this is something that I know is fun. I'm presenting it in a fun way. I'm bringing the fun, right? We can't do, not all activities are going to be like high up on motivation
Yeah.
level, but you bring the fun and the motivation, right? So, you know, I'm like, I'm checking myself there. Okay, good. Now I'm providing that wait time. Okay, I'm quieting my mouth. This one is hard.
Uh-huh.
It's like like I said, I caught myself doing it. We had just talked about it and I had to catch myself in the moment. Like I was not going to stop talking and provide that wait time. I had to stop myself and check myself and then go down. Once our students are showing an emerging skill, or when we are considering, like when it's communication that we're working on, that level of prompting allows us to be responsive to what is needed, but without over prompting. So like we keep saying, go to the top, make sure you're hitting those first few first before we get into providing a visual prompt and a verbal prompt, because we want to make sure that we are staying away from that over prompting and staying away from compliance. So we like to just say, yeah, least to most. That's where we kind of spend most of our time when we are looking at a prompting hierarchy.
Mhm. All right. So, prompting hierarchy, what it is not. So, it is not meant to be used in a way um, that produces prompt dependency in students. So I think we've kind of hit
We,
on this quite a bit so far, that you really want to avoid that. And the way to do that is you're going to start at the top of that hierarchy every time and work your way down, no matter what the situation is, no matter if it's like the activity that you did yesterday and they needed this level. And so you're just going to automatically jump there. No, you're going to start at the top and work your way down because it's a new day. It's a different, you don't know what their motivation level is yet. Like you start at the top. Prompts are also not used to fill in quiet space while a
what I
student is
was
processing
doing.
or responding. Remember the clock. Yeah, I think that's the greatest visual. Remember the clock. Remember that it takes time to fill that up. And if you're interrupting that process, they're not able to complete it. And then you're interrupting their learning and everything for that activity, for processing that information, for processing their response and knowing what they want to say and like where they're needing to go in their AAC system or which mode of communication they're choosing to be able to relay that the quickest and most efficiently to us. So quiet down and start at the top.
Have that prompt hierarchy right next to you, Mod Podge.
Yes.
Mod Podge on a clipboard or something. It needs to be right there by you. Okay, so we've talked about different prompting hierarchies, and the one that we really like when we are working with our teams and students that are working on communication and AAC is the prompting hierarchy by Kata Hearn. And as you saw, if you reference back to that, there was no physical prompting on that. So that's how we do that. So, but we also talked about on other prompting hierarchies, and for other skills, you can see even on this visual right here, the physical down there at the bottom. And you probably have heard of hand over hand. Maybe you've seen it in action, maybe you've done it. So for us with hand over hand, the issue with that is that students are not developing autonomy, right? They are not in control of what is happening in this lesson now. When we provide that hand over hand, we are taking away that independence. And again, the essence of communication is independence. It's autonomy. It's saying what we want to say when we want to say it. It is also choosing not to say something when we don't want to say it. So if a student is not responding to our other prompts and we feel the need to do hand over hand, it could be because the student actually didn't want to say anything. And now we're taking their hand and we're kind of forcing them to say something, but that is not what they wanted. So again, it takes that autonomy away. Autonomy is related to self-actualization. Again, that's whose voice is this? Is this me as the educator telling you what to say with your voice, or is this your actual voice? And again, that I don't know, Jeanna, I feel like this can harm your relationship with your student
Yeah.
too. So then it affects your session next time, because now that motivation to communicate with me, I've harmed because I took away their independence and I made them talk to me when they didn't want to. So again, it can have repercussions besides just that little moment. Again, it's forcing it, and that undermines learning by replacing it with either resistance or apathy. And we've talked about this before, that learned helplessness. This can be one of the places it comes from, because we are telling a student like, no, you're going to do it. I'm going to help you do it. I'm going to hold your hand and make you do it. And that's it's taking away from them their autonomy, which can lead to that apathy, and then it can lead to resistance. So sometimes we've seen this too, where student doesn't want to use their AAC system anymore because it has become a compliance thing, and they weren't able to use it or not use it when they chose to. So again, it can have those long-lasting repercussions that we definitely are not wanting to get from our prompt hierarchy, right? Like these are not the ultimate goals from prompting. And then again, it reduces interaction to that compliance and not communication, which we talk about all the time. That is not the goal of our time together, right? Compliance is not the goal, communication is goal. So hand over hand, just don't do it. And if you want to talk it over more, definitely talk to your AAC therapist. Talk it over with somebody who has had like experience working with a variety of students and teams.
For sure. All right. And then, so the dependency that we have talked about emerges from, and what we've talked about already, too prompting too much, too quickly, and not pulling it away fast enough. So you're doing it for too long. And then that inadequate use of that wait time. That wait time is so key. I don't know how many times Maggie and I have both shared with you, as well as like with each other. Like we're like, oh, I really did do the wait time. I reminded myself to do it. And a student surprises us with like either, they responded appropriately or they responded with something that was just so genius and like novel, and was like, oh my gosh, would have never gotten that like answer. We've never had that shared experience if we hadn't provided that wait time. The wait time is crucial. That's why we had a whole module on it, was because it is so crucial for our students, and all of our students. So, and then the prompting, again, you have to start at the top. Don't start where you left off. Don't start where you think they need it. You don't know.
Yeah,
We don't know.
you don't.
We
You
don't.
don't know.
We
It's a
don't know.
bad guess.
So you're just guessing, you're assuming, don't do it. Start at the top and work your way down. Um, and then again, just to reiterate, if you do those, if you start like prompting too much, if you're starting too high in the hierarchy and not at the top, and if you're not providing that wait time, you're getting into the area of compliance again. We don't want that. We want communication. Communication is beautiful when it's like in its natural form. Let that beauty happen. Don't interrupt it and uh, elicit compliance instead.
Yeah.
And we don't want prompt dependency either. So we want to avoid it.
Yep. Other ways that prompt dependency will emerge, it's that repetition without variety. So repetition without variety is when we're doing the same activities day after day after day, but we're not giving any variety. We're not doing it in a different context, in a different activity that's related. It's like when you're doing worksheets that are like that, that's the example that comes into my mind. When we do like worksheets,
Yeah.
all day, every day at this time. So that's that repetition, but we're maybe hitting on good words or good phrases in there, but we're not doing it with variety. So often you'll see these programmed responses. So, right, I want cookie. And it never deviates from I want. It's always I want cookie, I want drink, instead of, get cookie, drink please, or something. So we're not giving it any variety. So this becomes a programmed response, and you'll see prompt dependency from that. In essence, a pattern that is hard to break without significant prompting. So again, if we are doing repetition without variety, we get these programmed responses. It's really hard to break that down and to get then different novel sentences unless we do a lot of prompting. So again, we're kind of hurting ourselves. Like it'll be that like terrible cycle that we're getting in. So we talked about repetition with variety a lot in different modules. So reflect on those and go back and watch them. And then again, lack of motivation. We talk about this a lot. We only want to talk about things we're interested in talking about, right? I mean, we had a whole module on this and we talked about it. What happens when we are not motivated? Like Jeanna's very polite. I kind of am like obnoxious. I just stop looking at you. It's the same for our students. If motivation is insufficient, we are back to compliance. Students are just completing something because we're wanting them to. And again, like the actions will be there. So the student will be completing this task, or we'll be helping them to complete this task. And so we're seeing this get completed, but the learning's not happening up here. Think about like when you go to a workshop that you have to go to, it's like mandated and you do not want to be there. You're doing the actions, right? You're in your chair, you're sitting there, you're looking, but up here you are tuned out and you are on a beach somewhere, not paying any attention, and you are not absorbing the information, you're not learning. And then think about it like when you're motivated to go to a conference or a workshop. I mean, you're sitting there again. So the action's the same. You're sitting there and you're looking, but you're thinking about what's going on. You're taking notes. You're interested in what's happening. So you're learning. So again, you have to really think about that motivation piece. Even if your student is completing the task, are they actually learning anything from it? Are they actually engaged cognitively and mentally with you? So it's a lot to think about. But that's why these modules are so good, because they build on each other. So you can reference back to things we've already talked about.
All right. Oops. Gosh. Well, now I went too far. Okay,
You're
there
fine.
we
You'll
go.
get
I'm in trouble with my mouse today. All right, so we love this. Wait expectantly. I mean, Maggie and we're still working on our ability
yeah,
every day, every session. We
every
have to
day.
like cognitively remind ourselves, wait, after we provide an opportunity, because silence is the best way to encourage AEC use. Um, and there's just so many benefits to it, providing that processing time, that learning time. But it is also to encourage that AC use, that I'm being quiet because I want to hear what you have to say on this subject. So it's also providing that respect to them. And yes, it's golden. It's golden. So just do it. Wait expectantly.
All right. So when we're thinking about appropriate prompting, there are tools versus prompts. Okay. So like let's break that down because you'll see how it applies to like your own life. So tools are the items that we use to allow us to demonstrate functional skills. So when we have a tool for a student, such as an AAC device, a timer, a scheduling book, maybe a picture schedule, a token board. Those are tools, and these allow students to demonstrate functional skills or to demonstrate independence or to increase their independence. So think about like your day. If you have a calendar, which is a tool, and you're able to track yourself on your calendar and put down everything you need to do, you're able to be pretty independent in your day. If you don't have your schedule, it's like then that's when I'm like walking into a classroom. I'm like, who do I see next? I have to have the the people, the adults in the classroom help me manage my day because I didn't write it down and I can't remember. So tools like an AAC device, because sometimes we'll hear that, like, I wonder if the student doesn't need their AAC system anymore.
Mhm.
It's good to think that this is a tool, and a tool is always a helpful thing. It's always a good thing because it helps us to do things independently or to demonstrate understanding in a different way. So, like, I would never want someone to take my calendar away because I would have trouble. It would be difficult for me. Tools are not faded unless the functional skill is resolved or replaced by another tool. So that's, it's not something that we take away. We may use a different tool, but those are the things that create the opportunity for independence. Prompts are not tools. So we've talked about this a ton. Prompts are what we are trying to fade, right? We are trying to use the least intrusive prompt possible. We're trying to go up to that ladder really quickly. They're cues that are given to provide support for learning. So there's a time and a place for them. We want to do it to help a student feel successful in activities, to help them achieve this goal. But again, the ultimate goal is for them to become independent. So that's why we talked a ton about not over prompting. They should be faded as a student is able to use and manage their tools with increased independence. Something that this makes me think about though is like, how we've talked about over and over again, start at the top,
Yeah.
slowly work your way down. Because in my head, I think to myself, well, I know I'm down here, but I have a plan to move that student up. But I don't really have a plan. And it was, I was listening to a webinar with Karen Erickson, Dr. Karen Erickson, and she was saying that like, we're really, as a group of like just us as adults, we're really bad at fading prompts. Like it isn't something that we think about really. Like we stay here. Like if this is where you think a student is, you kind of just stay there. And while you might say, I have a plan to move them down, it's probably not like a written plan. It might not be something that you've talked about with your team. Now, maybe you have, but for me, it was like, I'm like, that's right, Dr. Karen Erickson. So it's better to provide the least amount of prompts so that you don't get caught in that where you have now over prompted and you didn't mean to. You really thought you had a plan to reduce those prompts. I just think about that sometimes when I want to open my mouth or after I have opened my mouth and I'm like, I didn't have enough wait time. Dr. Karen Erickson is right. I didn't have a plan to reduce these prompts. It's best not to even go to that next prompt yet, to check yourself, right? Like we said, we're doing it every day in every session.
Yeah.
It is an ongoing learning thing for us every day.
And that's why having that prompt hierarchy printed out
Yeah.
and not just printed out, but where you're going to see it and use it. So if it's in like the sleeve of your data binder, if it's on the back of your clipboard where you have your data sheets, wherever it is that you need to put it, if you need to minimize it and put it on your lanyard, wherever you need to put it so that you can access it. But because we need visual supports too. I mean, we've all talked about that
We need our
before. We need
tools.
visual supports in our tools too. So have it where you're going to see it, because then it's a reminder, oh yes, I need to start at the top every time, because otherwise we're going to fall into that rut of always going to a direct verbal or an indirect like, and starting there instead of starting at the top and then working our way down. All right, and so this is just a nice reminder about aided language input. So we talked about the tools and then the prompts are to help with the success. But aided language input, again, is at the top of that prompting hierarchy. It's not an actual prompt. Please don't get confused by that. It is the teaching that we're doing and what we should be surrounding and immersing that student in before we consider providing them with a prompt. So aided language input is teaching AAC again. It's speaking our words on their AAC system for the purpose of teaching it to them. We don't expect a response. If they like imitate us or if they do respond to us, that's great. Woo, celebrate.
Yeah.
But we don't expect it. I'm not sitting there and waiting for them necessarily. We do provide the wait time, but I'm not waiting for a response necessarily. I'm providing that aided language input for the pure and only purpose of teaching it. The prompting then and that hierarchy goes under that umbrella because that's what we should be having happening all the time. Again, immersion is the goal, to really truly teach it. Just like if think about a foreign language, I sat through 3 years of Spanish and I learned it pretty good. However, it's not as good as if I would have went to a country and been completely immersed in it and everything. So we want to immerse our students in that aided language input. And then if we are wanting a response and they need some support to get to that success of being able to provide that response, then I start in on my prompting hierarchy with the motivation, with that waiting, and then going down. So prompting is where we are assuming a response. Aided language input, you are not expecting a response, nor is a response required. It's purely just teaching where we speak our words on their AAC system so that they can learn where those words are and how to use them.
Exactly. All right, so let's wrap up some of our things that we talked about for appropriate prompting. So again, AAC is that umbrella term. It means many things. It's not just a high-tech speech narrating device, right? It's how we communicate with our eyes and our body and all those different things. Aided language input, what we just talked about, it means speaking your words. We're not expecting the student to respond. And like Jeanna said, it's like we do it no matter what. The student doesn't respond, like she said, they might respond. That's awesome. If they don't respond, that's okay too. We're going to continue to do it because we are creating an immersive classroom and an immersive therapy room and an immersive school in their language. Prompting needs are going to vary by context. They're going to vary by the activity in the day that's happening. They can like for each individual student, the level of prompting they need is going to change all day long and in between days. So again, go back up to the top of the prompting hierarchy every time. Avoid the hand over hand support. And then the big two takeaways, right? Motivate and wait at all levels. Like we need to make sure that even if the student, we're doing an activity, they actually do need that visual support down there at the bottom. First, we're making sure we're being motivating. Then we're going to wait. then we go to an indirect visual, then we go to a direct visual, then we do our verbal, we're going to go through that each step of the way until we get there. But again, motivate and wait at the top. That a lot of magic happens. And if you don't wait, you are usually interrupting the student's thought process. And I mean, you probably have examples of this. I mean, like I said, I have a couple examples just from this week and when I wasn't going to wait long enough, and how, that just robs that learning and that experience, and like hearing what the student was going to say all on their own. So again, this
Mhm.
is why super awesome. Print out those prompt hierarchies, put them everywhere.
And I think we forgot to mention too on that prompt hierarchy that each arrow that was down has weight on it because
Yes.
you're waiting in between each one. I think we forgot to point that out. That's another
Good
reason I
point.
love
Good
that
catch.
hierarchy. Yeah,
I know. Like it is. It's just that, like, when you look
it's
at
such
it,
a
you're like,
perfect visual.
oh, I've not been waiting long enough because she's saying to wait every single time. And that is the truth. Like after we
Yeah,
provide a prompt, again, you wait and you see. And it's like, okay, no. So then I move down.
yeah,
But yeah, good catch, Gina, because
I forgot
that's
about
super, super awesome part of that. I just like, could we love that prompt hierarchy anymore? I
do.
don't know.
No, I
I don't.
don't think so. So, all right. So, our second module that we're going into is module number 11. If you're following along, like I said, with the original modules and printing out those materials from PrAACtical AAC that Tabitha came up with. And so it's called Let the Child Lead. So we always definitely want to follow their lead because that's where we're going to get the most communication. And that's what it says down here. When motivation to communicate is intrinsic engagement happens. So when we're really following like what they're motivated by, that's where the beauty happens.
Mhm.
So we're gonna dive into this topic now.
Okay, so learning, we've talked about this in other modules. Learning emerges from meaningful social experiences, from meaningful emotional experiences. Like we said, we are much more willing to work with somebody who we like and we know they like us. And when we're more willing to work with that person, we're more able to learn from that person and that experience. So, therefore, if we want that to happen, we have to meet our students, we have to go there and we have to be willing to do that, right? We have to be willing to let them lead and create these meaningful opportunities. And we want to respond to their expression of interest or their bids for engagement, whatever that looks like for them. All right. But we have to do those things. We have to take time to figure that out, to build relationships, to foster communication in any modality, right? If they are using whatever they need for an AAC system, however they're communicating. And again, this is what supports that learning. So we really have to take time when a student is new to us, after a break, after maybe a really stressful day yesterday. We're going back and we're spending time to make sure our connection, that we are putting time into building our relationship and our connection so that we can support their learning and go, give them all those things that they need.
All right. So engagement is that agent of change, just as Maggie was just talking about. And if we go back to, I think it was motivation, the module of motivation, we discussed this, how like whenever they're really motivated, they're going to be engaged, that dopamine in the brain is going to be released, those good feelings emerge, we're having fun during the activity, it's going to be memorable, and then more opportunities are sought because, and learning's going to happen, those relationships and that rapport between us and our students is going to grow, and it's just an improved quality of life because when we're enjoying what we're doing and what we're learning about, we have that excitement about that, we want to share it with others. It's wonderful. And so we have wonderful feelings about ourselves, about the experiences and communication that we're having with others. So that's what we're striving for. So that motivation is definitely key, and we can get that by following our child's lead. And we're going to talk more about that.
All right. So there are different types of engagement. So it's just these are I love when she goes deep into like the nerdy part of it because it helps us to have a grasp on it. So she even has some references down there. Like, let's get a little nerdy here. There are three different types of engagement. We have behavioral engagement, cognitive engagement, and emotional engagement. Um, so One of these types of engagement might be the only engagement that is present in interaction. Maybe there's a couple different engagements happening in our interaction, but that's why it's kind of nice to have this framework, because engagement is often compromised when we are working with students that have complex communication needs, right? So we have to help them build that engagement. So it's kind of nice to have an idea of what those different engagements look like. So behavioral engagement, when we can tell like that a student is engaged with something, sometimes they will give us some behavioral signs. And this could be that the student is increasing their time on task. There's like overt attention, right? We know a lot of students can be paying attention when they're not looking or when it seems like they're not paying attention. But we know that sometimes that overt attention, when they do look or when they do slow down or when they put their ear like more towards you, you're seeing that overt attention. And behavioral engagement can look like classroom participation, asking questions, or like choosing to do a challenging task because they know it's going to be fun and motivating. They get to work with this fun person who makes it really interesting. So you might see some of those behavioral engagements. And that might be something that you're paying attention to. We also have cognitive engagement, and this refers to the mental effort that we're willing to do at any given time. Cognitive engagement can be meaningful processing, using our strategies, right? We teach strategies, and then when we see a student use it independently, we knew there was like cognitive engagement going on, like all of our work, all of that time that we spent teaching the strategy has now come to fruition, and they're showing good cognitive engagement because they use that independently. Cognitive engagement, concentration. So that might be like, again, you might see that with like that time on task because they're really concentrating, they're really focusing on their activity. And then that metacognition, thinking about thinking, helping to structure their day or talk about the different strategies they could use. So there's lots of different ways to show cognitive engagement. And then we have emotional engagement, and this can be related to how positive their emotions are coming across, or enthusiasm or interest are during learning. So again, when you're thinking through how to support students, it can be good to think through like those are the things that you're maybe observing and looking for to get an idea what activities and what things are motivating for our students. Motivation helps to lead to engagement.
Mhm. And then don't get discouraged by the journey. Like really honor the journey. And I think about pre-K kids all the time. And that's the majority of my caseload is pre-K students. And some of them come in and they're just preoccupied. They don't have that joint attention developed yet. And so this is where letting them lead and entering into their world really comes into play. And so following their lead, if we're gonna just kind of walk around the room, I'm gonna walk around the room with them and provide aided language input. So just honor the journey from like them coming in, being preoccupied with like their environment and trying to process through everything that sensory is going on in their environment, this new structure, this new routine and everything, to where then they start to develop joint attention and how we can foster that. And we're going to talk about that. um, to their early emergent communication abilities, where they start to be able to express to us, and then their ownership over learning, communicating, and participating as a social partner to us, and really having those conversations and being able to communicate back and forth with purpose.
I love that slide, and I love how you said it because it's like if a kiddo comes into our classroom day one and we kind of skip those first steps,
Mhm.
we can get them to come sit at a table and to sit while we're doing an activity. But again, is their engagement? Are they actually learning anything from that? Are they motivated by it? Probably not, because we skipped spending time to develop those skills and our relationship with those skills. So it's just real. And like you said, it's okay. Like honor that journey.
Yeah.
Don't be discouraged. Just reference back to the things that you're supposed to be doing and keep at it. But one of those things that you talked about, it's that joint attention, right? And that's something we talk about a lot. Like we want to see the student have more joint attention with us. And we know joint attention is one of those like foundational skills that are super important to then work on a lot of different things. Because again, when we have that joint attention, then we can build our relationship, then we can build motivation and engagement in our school day. So there are different ways to help foster that joint attention. And you can do it by following the child's lead. So following the student's lead. So first, stop and observe your student. What is it that they like to do when they're given the space and time to do whatever it is they want to do? Maybe they like to, like Jeanna said, the student likes to walk around the classroom. Okay, you're seeing them do that. Maybe they like to like squeeze into a tight spot. Okay, maybe that means that there's some sensory seeking things going on. How do they interact with items? Do they like to play independently? Do they like to like dump things out and then move to the next thing? Okay, now we're getting an idea of what they are doing when they have that free time that interests them. How are they getting their needs met? How are they responding around them? But the first thing is to observe, okay? And then, like Jeanna said, then imitate that, okay? So, like if a student likes to walk around the room, walk around the room with them. When you see them stop and look out a window, stop and look out a window. When you see them go to a toy and dump it, you can go to the toy and talk about it. And the whole time you're doing it, like Jeanna said, you're providing that aided language input on an AAC system. You're doing verbal referencing. Oh, I see you walking around the classroom and you're smiling. I think you like that. Oh, you stopped and looked out the window. I see a bird. Wow. So you're doing all those other skills that we talked about. But then what you want to try to do is make a bid for a turn. Okay. So when you are observing the student, you're imitating their actions. Maybe now you do something a little silly or you do something to try to get them to stop and pay attention to you. So it could be like when they dump the toys, you take out a box of toys and dump it too. And see if that'll get them to stop and look at you. Now you've kind of entered into their space and maybe they'll be allowing. I know like this happens a lot when students like building with blocks. And if
Mhm.
you take a block, sometimes, not all the time, sometimes they might not like it, right? But other times you put that block on their thing and they look at you like, oh, so you're trying to break into their what they're doing, what they like it. I also think this is a great time to like talk to your OTs, especially like we said, if we see a student that like we think there's some sensory things going on, this can be a really great time to talk to your OT. Go to an OT session when they're doing sensory things. Co-treat during a sensory session, because a lot of times then you're getting into your student space, right? You're right there with them, and you can get some of that a time where they are willing to like look at you and invite you into what's happening for them. So OT co-training times can be really helpful for this kind of stuff. And then when you're making that bid for a turn, so you might reach into their toys, you might request something from them, you might interact with a part of their toy, offer an exchange. That's a fun one. If they have a car, you have a car, and try to put it in their field of vision, see if they'll trade with you. Anything that you can do to try to break in. And don't be discouraged if it doesn't happen today, if it doesn't happen in this interaction. It's okay. That doesn't mean it's not going to happen. It just means it hasn't happened yet. Don't get discouraged. Do these steps again. Then you can shape that opportunity. Try to entice the child to do something. So to keep that interaction going, to build on that joint attention, if they did like, give you that bid for a turn, you want to sustain it by maybe tempting or managing the materials, right? Like if they do love blocks, you keep all the blocks, right? And they only get a few, and they want more, they turn to you and you're like, oh, you turned to me. I think that means you want more blocks, and you give them another block, so you keep some of the materials back and do it. But again, don't push too far. You want this to be a positive thing. If it's not working, if the student's getting aggravated with you, stop, right? Try again tomorrow. Don't be discouraged, but it's all about building trust. You're building a relationship with the student that they can see that you're honoring the way that they're communicating already by that verbal
Mhm.
referencing, by not pushing too hard or too fast, by going into the activity that is interesting to them, whatever that may be, and meeting them there and not being too pushy, which that part's hard for me. Like once I have a little bit of success, I'm like, yes. And then I try to, go in too much. So yeah, that's a good reminder. Don't push too far, go slow, go steady. It is worth taking time to do this, to build that foundation. You will see payouts later. If you try to, go too fast or skip this step, then it's going to be 6 months down the line and we're struggling to see like the AAC system take hold, and then we're like, what's going on, and it could be that we haven't really spent enough time here. So it is something to really think through. Following the child's lead, so important.
For sure. And then once that joint attention is established, just being aware of like where their joint attention is, because once it does get like a little bit established, you're still going to use that verbal referencing. Oh my gosh, we use it all the time. but you're still going to use that, like, oh, you're looking at, Miss Mary just came in, would you like to go say something to Miss Mary? If it's a person that walked into the room, or if they keep looking at the blocks, oh, I see you looking at the blocks, we're going to play with the blocks later, right now it's whatever time. Or like, oh, I see you playing with the blocks, or looking at the blocks, and if it is an appropriate time, like, let's go play with the blocks, I see you looking there, let's go over there. So you're going to interject those opportunities to engage on like what their focal point is. So you definitely want to still pay attention to what their visual attention is, and then take advantage of that and really play into that and put language and communication with where their attention is. Accept all attempts, like Maggie said, to engage without the pressure to do more. So if they're reaching, if they're touching something, exploring, manipulating it with their hands, just like our whole module on multimodal communication, that we're going to accept all modes of communication, it comes into play here. We're not going to expect them to do more, to do it in a more acceptable, like, or a way that like unfamiliar people would be able to interpret. We're going to accept that, and then we're just going to provide that aided language input on another way to be able to say it as well.
All right. And there are some more tips. I feel like that you can never have enough tips for anything, but more tips for fostering joint attention, communication, and learning. So get down on the child's level, like literally. So if they're on the floor, they're sitting in a little kid chair, that's what you're going to be doing too. You don't want to be above them. You want to be down where you can look at each other's face, where you have the opportunity that if they turn their head, they're going to be looking right at you, right? You're not above them, and you're missing that opportunity to make some joint attention with your eyes and your face. Respond relevantly to the child's actions and comments. So again, that's that verbal referencing. However, they're showing that they're communicating, because they are, we're verbal referencing it, right? So like, oh, I see you looking at the blocks. Oh, blocks are so fun. I love blocks. Let's go play blocks. Again, you're putting that language to the ways they're already communicating. Shift your attention when the child shifts. So you might be like really engaged with something, and then all of a sudden the student looks over. Follow their gaze, see what they're looking at, what caught their attention. Like Jeanna said, it could be somebody walked in the room, it could be that like something went out the window, something exciting has happened. It could just be the way the light is coming in the window, right? It looks really nice and this caught the student's attention. Pay attention to that, verbal reference it. That's why you're getting a feel for the things that matter to them and that bring them motivation. And then allow the child to explore or experiment in their own way. So they like to play with toys a certain way, that's okay. We're going to let them do that. We're going to allow them to explore and experiment. And we're going to try to do those other things to try to weasel our way in there so that we can get some of that joint attention going on.
Mm-hmm. All right. So in summary, set aside your agenda. I love this one because
That's a
it's
good one.
a good reminder. I think anytime that I've set aside my agenda and you really do follow the student's lead, like those are some of the best and most memorable sessions for me. At the beginning of this year, I had one student who I won't forget, because he really wanted to talk about like his lunch. He was excited what he was going to have for lunch. And I had this like game activity prepared, but just set it aside because he kept wanting to talk about lunch and kept going back to that. Set it aside, and we engaged in a shared writing activity about what he was going to be eating at lunch. And then just the smile and the joy on his face about telling me what he was going to eat. I mean, that's the goal. That's what we want. And again, like I still remember that session, even though it's been how many months ago, because of the joy that like I got out of it from seeing him have so much joy, and the communication that we achieved out of it, because I didn't stick with like, oh no, we're going to do this. No, sometimes you have to set aside your agenda and just go with the flow with what they want to talk about and what they want to do. Um, that's where you're going to get a lot of that motivation, that engagement, and true communication from them. Release dismissive assumptions of others. So just again, you can't ever assume. You have to presume potential. You have to presume that they have the skills, and you don't know what's going to happen. So when we go back to that prompting hierarchy, starting at the top, working down, providing that aided language input, just going with the flow, because you don't know where you're going to go that day. Each day is different. It's a new day, new experience. So just go with it. Um, Maggie and I always talk about this. Get started.
Yeah.
Don't wait for and take small baby steps. AC is a journey, it's a marathon. Take your small steps, enjoy and relish in the experiences that you're going to have at each stage. So, um, and like it said, honor that journey, because it's going to be beautiful when you look back on it with certain kids. I mean, there's one in particular that I look back on and I'm just like, wow, when I think about where we are now. And that we did take the time that we needed at each level of the journey, because she was one of these students who came in definitely preoccupied for a long time. But because we followed her lead, um, she was a kid that I remember doing like an evaluation on, and like we would be flipping through a book, and we would get through a whole book in less than 30 seconds. But we just went with it. I provided what aided language input I could during that time. We focused. She loved farm animals. We found out was a way to like kind of get in there and follow her lead, and we did it. We followed her lead, and because of that, she is now just flourishing. And so, just really honor the journey. Take the time. Focus on the quality of the experiences and your aided language input that you're providing, and the wait time that you're providing. And that verbal referencing is key, and
Mhm.
accepting any kind of mode of communication that they're having and putting meaning to it for them. Uh, be flexible and accept the unexpected. It's gonna happen, but it's wonderful when it, like I said, I just think it's beautiful and wonderful when this stuff happens, because I'm like, oh, it's a learning experience for you, and the child is going to get, and the AC user is going to get so much from it because of how you respond if you are flexible and accept that unexpected. Be patient. Like we said, it's going to take time. It's going to take multiple visits. Focus on building that rapport. If you try to force things, you're going to get into that compliance, and you're gonna lose that pal part of this whole Master Pal series. You have to be patient. It is hard, but it's worth it. Be present in the moment, with that student, and be very responsive to them, really looking for any kind of sign. And like we said, their visual attention, and being responsive to what any kind of mode that they're using to communicate to us. And I don't think you really have to find the joy, because I think it just happens whenever you follow all these other things. It happens. Um, there can be joy in each and every session. It may be a small thing, but there's joy there. I don't think you have to find it. I think that it's just there,
You have to have
and
your
just
eyes
realize
open
it.
to, yeah, you just have to
Yeah.
realize it. I'm there
Yes.
with you. It's like a mindset thing. You can choose to
Yes.
be like, "Ugh," or you can be like, you know what? Hey, that was a win and that was awesome and joyful and I'm taking it, you know.
Yeah.
That's
Don't
a good
focus
mindset.
on how long, or that yeah, don't focus on the negative. Keep your eyes open and just
Mhm.
focus on the joy.
All right, so let's recap again. Aided language input. When we are doing aided language input, that is how all language is learned, right? So all language is learned through demonstration, whether it's our developmental language or a foreign language, AAC. All of it is learned through demonstration. And for AAC, that aided language input, let the child teach you. I mean, that was like what this whole thing is. By following the child's lead, we're learning from the child how to support them and how to make their learning motivating and meaningful for them, which is the whole goal of it, right? So let the child teach you to build those important connections and to build their trust in you, so that you can help them achieve, the things that they want to achieve. And then again, this is that whole mindset. Be present and find the joy. Um, or like you don't have to find the joy. Just have your eyes open. And there's joy that is happening if you choose to have that mindset.
Yeah.
Let the child lead to establish those engaging emotional contexts. It's going to be from those experiences that learning then emerges. So,
Mhm.
oh, I just love those recaps. They're such good ones.
All right, so we always pick a couple of places that we really like for you to learn a little bit more. And so the AC in the Cloud Conference has an archived webinar by Rachel Langley, who we absolutely love. If you don't follow her on Facebook, I think she started an Instagram recently too, but Facebook
Mhm.
is mainly where she is. Definitely follow her and subscribe to her. She did a webinar on prompt awareness and AEC instruction, and the link is here so you can go watch it. Angelman syndrome. We love this place. If you haven't already checked it out, it's so
Mhm.
worth your time. But for what we talked about today, the communication training series, module number 23 about shared reading, really talks about like the prompting and letting the child or letting the child lead there, and following their lead. I think it really flows over. And if you want a structured way almost to like sit down and teach yourself how to follow their lead, it's with shared reading,
Yeah.
sitting there and really just exploring the book with them and providing them with good input during those activities. So those are two good ones that you can follow up with.
All right, and that's it. We thank you for watching the video. We look forward to meeting and discussing this more in depth. And yeah,
All right.
so much.
Bye, everybody.